Jim, what did you think?
I liked this movie a lot, actually. I liked, again, how goofy it was. I liked the colorful Mothra. I liked the ugly larvae.
Yeah, they look kind of like turds.
That's exactly what they looked like, yeah. Yeah, somebody pinched a loaf. Yeah, it was just like a fun movie. The thing I was kind of taken aback by was how, like, the first half of the movie was really about the human characters.
Yeah.
In a movie called Mothra versus Godzilla, the first half was all about the people, and I'm like, nah, I don't care. show me these two giant monsters fighting. You know, it was kind of the same thing as like King Kong versus Godzilla, but that was really exciting. That was worth the wait.
All right. Well, you know what? I mean, any giant monster movie is going to have to just kind of go through the motions of human characters. Right? Freddy versus Jason does it. Like, that's what movies do, right? I think this movie does a good job of that. As far as all the Godzilla movies, this to me gives a compelling human story, or a story with the human characters, I should say. And it involves Mothra, obviously. It doesn't really involve Godzilla for a long time, which I'm fine with. Yeah. But it's, the twin fairies and this evil fucking businessman with the Hitler mustache doing his thing. I love it. I find that stuff really interesting. I think Kumiyama is an awesome villain, at least really just for the first half of the movie. Then after a while, he kind of sort of off screen gets in a fight with his business partner, and then next time we see him, he's like literally fighting him and just trying to steal money, and it's like, okay, this character's not that interesting anymore. But
yeah, exactly, yeah. And I mean, because when you first meet him, he
almost, but by that point, Godzilla's going around, so I don't need that many interesting characters. The interesting characters are there in the first half before we get the monsters. I think it's a perfect balance of that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, I wasn't. I guess by the end of the movie, I didn't care about the fact that half the movie was devoted to the people characters of the movie. I liked it. Was there that much people stuff in King Kong versus Godzilla? Or there's probably more in
King Kong versus Godzilla, too. If we're comparing these two, like, King Kong versus Godzilla is schlock. This movie rides the line a bit, but to me, it's not schlock. Mm-hmm. King Kong versus Godzilla is like a glimpse of what's to come in the series in like the 70s. I don't think this movie is there. And I think this movie has the ability to create an interesting character or two, and ability to make Godzilla still a threatening villain to a certain extent. I mean, yeah, he's clumsy as hell in this movie, but that's whatever, you know.
Yeah. The only thing I wasn't really jiving with was the twin fairies. It felt kind of shoehorned in. I don't know, like, but again, that's not my culture. I'm not Japanese. Maybe there's some meaning to it that I'm not picking up on.
Well, I want to talk about that because I kind of said we were going to talk about that, and then I guess we didn't end up really. But what I like about this movie, what I like, I guess, about Mothra as a foil to Godzilla, for lack of a better term, Godzilla is this scientific creation. Mothra is maybe a scientific creation. I'm not 100% sure because I don't really remember the 1961 Mothra too well. I know the fairies are in that, though. Again, I remembered a fairy scene that wasn't in this movie, so it must be in that one. But it's mysticism versus science, but it's also like, I mean, in future movies, I'm thinking of the most recent American movie that had Mothra in it. Mothra is basically there to provide kind of balance to the world, and in that case to fight Ghidorah and Rodan. In this case, you know, she reluctantly agrees to fight Godzilla, but really it's less about like order, and to me it's just that kind of interesting science versus mysticism angle. Like, you see the people at
Infant Island.
That is a fantastical way of life. You know, that this is something that there's traces of this in King Kong versus Godzilla, but at the end of the day, King Kong, despite being a large ape, is not that fantastical. Like, he's not born of science, we know that, but
yeah,
he's not, you know, he's kind of worshipped as a god, sort of, by these people that are afraid of him, but there's not he doesn't have twin fairies going around and twin mystical fairies who are able to evade capture by like disappearing and reappearing, and who can also read minds. Like that fantasy element is such a big part of Mothra, and I think that's really interesting to pair these two monsters against each other because they are so different. Not only does one walk and, let's be honest, stumble, and the other one flies, but they're just so different. I like that. I think that really works. I don't know if this has come up in this podcast before. It's definitely come up between you and me. I hate fantasy. I just do. It's just not my thing.
I can guarantee you this has come up multiple times in the podcast.
Okay, but to me, I don't like that fantasy stuff. Maybe I wouldn't like Mothra by herself that much, but Mothra in opposition to something that isn't fantastical, I think, is interesting.
I just looked it up, and before I tell you my findings, I'm going to explain what my point of view on this was. I thought it was interesting that you had like a hellish, destructive monster that was created by science, and then you had a monster that was also created by science, but it was this heroic monster that was quite literally swooping in to attempt to save the day anyways. And I thought it was neat that you had these two monsters that were both created by science battling it out, but one was bad and only cared about destruction, and this other one was worshipped as like a deity and was kind of like a symbol for what happens to life when it's severely irradiated by a nuclear explosion or something. You know, like Mothra's dying, this island is essentially dead. I just thought that was like a whole kind of neat point of view. But as you were talking there, I just looked it up, and the original Mothra movie, which you were right originally, 1961, I said 62, Mothra is an island deity to the peoples of Infant Island that has just always existed. I don't think it was created by the nuclear explosion.
Yeah, I was going to say, in this movie, obviously the island has been affected by nuclear, but they don't necessarily imply that Mothra is giant because of that. I think you might kind of assume that, just like, oh yeah, because that's how Godzilla was born. But
yeah,
I don't think
and that's why I assumed that. That's exactly why. But yeah, I'm just reading this. The team discovers a vast jungle of mutated flora, a fleeing native tribe, and two young women only 12 inches tall. So yeah, so Mothra is just an existence. It is this fantasy thing. And now that I understand that, I really like what you were saying about it and your whole point of view on that. I agree with you. Any
other thoughts on Mothra vs. Godzilla? You like the goofiness?
Yeah,
of the Godzilla falling.
I'm really, I'm really excited to get into other Godzilla movies that just get the pure schlock.
Yeah, it's still a few years. You know, Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, probably tonally in line with this. Invasion of the Astro Monster, maybe a bit goofier because it's just very high sci-fi, and then Ebirah sucks. But then once we get Godzilla's son, then it's, no turning back from schlock.
Well, I'm still amazed at how different this movie is to the first Godzilla movie tonally.
Yeah.
And even like the James Bond series hasn't gone through that big of like a tonal shift. James Bond has always been kind of tongue-in-cheek, and sure, you had like pervy old man Roger Moore and the height of like stupid, awful jokes and stuff in that Roger Moore era, but that was still kind of in line with Bond. Whereas these two movies, compared to the original Godzilla, this is kind of like a schlock movie. A kaiju smash-a-ball,
But at the same time, it's a lot closer to the original Godzilla movie than King Kong versus Godzilla was.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I agree with you on that.
They don't transport a giant monster by balloon in this movie.
And then drop them hard onto the ground.
There's no monster that gets drunk and passes out after drinking a bunch of berry juice in this movie.
Yeah, you're very right about that. Very, very right.